Hey, good morning, everybody. Today's a little bit of a wonky day. There's fire drills, there's assemblies, so I just wanted to make sure that I could get this off without being interrupted and give you guys the full picture of the impeachment process. So, anyway, here goes. Okay, it all starts out with the concept of separation of powers, and I'll read the slide. The Constitution follows the principles of separation of powers and checks and balances developed by Baron de Montesquieu during the Enlightenment. The government is broken up into three branches to prevent any one from having too much power. Okay, so the Enlightenment was a period of time in the late 16 through the 1700s that existed in Europe, primarily in France, Great Britain, and Scotland. The Enlightenment was a period where people began to question the relationship between citizens and their government. It sort of goes hand in hand with a number of other movements, such as the Renaissance, the Protestant Reformation, and the Scientific Revolution. These were all periods where people began to question beliefs that had been held for over 1,000 years in Europe. Okay. Some of the notable figures, along with Montesquieu, are people like John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, Voltaire, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We'll talk extensively about John Locke at a different time. But the story about Baron de Montesquieu is Montesquieu lived in France at the time of Louis XIV. Louis XIV is the ultimate absolute monarch. He had power over everything. It started and ended with him. When someone asked Louis XIV about matters of state, Louis XIV said, "I am the state." They called him the Sun King because everything revolved around him. Okay, so Montesquieu looked at the situation and he said, "This is too much power for one man or even one group of people to handle." His view was separate all the powers and then, in addition, give each group checks and balances over the other one to prevent any one group from getting too powerful. Okay, so where we get our idea of the three branches of government and separation of powers, it comes from Baron de Montesquieu. A lot of our constitutional ideals come from the Enlightenment and Enlightenment thinkers. Okay, so the next slide is about checks and balances. Checks and balances. To prevent those branches from abusing their powers, which would be tyranny, each branch has a series of checks against the other two. And there's way more than the ones I included. But the legislative branch, Congress. Congress has a check on the executive, which is congressional override, something we went over yesterday in terms of the Civil Rights Bill of 1866. Johnson's veto was overrode, and it requires a two-thirds vote in both houses. Congress can check the judicial branch because the Senate has to confirm a Supreme Court nominee. So that's their check on the power of the judicial branch. The executive, the president, has checks on the legislative and judicial. The president can veto a bill that Congress passes, as again we saw with the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And also the president is the one who nominates Supreme Court nominees or Supreme Court members, judges. And we're going to see that coming up. President Trump has nominated Amy Coney Barrett, and the Senate now has to confirm her. Okay, and then finally, the Supreme Court has checks on both the legislative and executive branches, and these checks are in the form of judicial review. Judicial review is a concept that was thought of for the first time in the case of Marbury versus Madison, judged by John Marshall. And it's the idea that the Supreme Court has the right and the power and the responsibility to look at all laws and all presidential actions that come up in a certain case and get to determine whether or not those are in line with the Constitution or violate the Constitution. That's called constitutionality. Okay, and if a law is determined to be unconstitutional, that law has to be removed. If a presidential action is unconstitutional or an executive order, that means that that executive order has to be reversed. Okay, so that's a major check on the other two branches that the Supreme Court has. And quite frankly, it's what makes the Supreme Court on the level of the other two and makes all the three branches virtually equal. In terms of impeachment, impeachment is another major check that Congress has over the power and the Supreme Court. Okay, so here we go. A major check that Congress, the legislative branch, has on the other two is impeachment. If a member of either the judicial or executive branches has done something wrong, Congress may impeach him or her. Impeachment is a process and does not necessarily mean removal from office. Think of impeachment as being charged with a crime. Okay? Judges, cabinet members, Supreme Court justices have been impeached, but only 4 presidents have ever been impeached: Andrew Johnson, Richard Nixon, Bill Clinton, and most recently Donald Trump. Okay, so we'll take a look at those presidents now. Okay, the first president to be impeached was Andrew Johnson. We saw this yesterday, that Andrew Johnson violated the Tenure of Office Act of 1868 by removing Edwin M. Stanton, the Secretary of War, without the consent of Congress. In the end, though, when the trial happened, Johnson was acquitted because the Supreme Court Chief Justice found that the Tenure of Office Act was unconstitutional. In addition, it's unlikely that Johnson would have been removed from office because the Senate, who acts as the jury in an impeachment trial, was primarily Democrat, and so was Johnson. So it's unlikely that a Senate will remove a president of the same party. In 1974, Richard Nixon was impeached for obstruction of justice in the Watergate investigation. The story of Watergate is that Richard Nixon had secretly hired a bunch of covert ex-CIA guys to break into the Democratic Party headquarters at the Watergate Hotel and steal classified information that would help him in his bid for re-election. They were discovered by a night watchman. They were arrested, and after a long, long investigation, it was found that Nixon was involved. Nixon tried to use executive privilege to withhold tapes that would have been evidence, tapes that were taken of him, conversations in the Oval Office, and it resulted in a Supreme Court case, U.S. versus Richard Nixon, in which he lost. Shortly after the decision in U.S. versus Nixon, the House voted to impeach Nixon. Before the House of Representatives could deliver the articles of impeachment, Nixon resigned. And then shortly after, he was pardoned by the new president, Gerald Ford. So he never faced a trial. In 1998, Bill Clinton was impeached because of perjury. Bill Clinton was being investigated by the Senate for an inappropriate relationship that he had with a woman named Paula Jones. In that investigation, Paula Jones's lawyer dug up somebody else named Monica Lewinsky, who claimed that she had an illicit affair with Bill Clinton in the Oval Office. When Clinton was asked under oath if he had had sex with Monica Lewinsky, he said, looking right into the camera, I've never had sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. That, since it was under oath, was determined to be perjury. Perjury is lying under oath. When it came to the trial, he was acquitted because the Chief Justice said that sexual act does not constitute sexual intercourse, and therefore he technically didn't lie. So that's why Bill Clinton was acquitted. You can research more on that. I don't want to do that in a video. It's a little bit salacious. And then most recently, which you guys are more familiar with, is the Donald Trump impeachment. In 2009, he was brought up on 2 articles of impeachment. The first was obstruction of Congress for refusing to provide financial documents, including his tax returns. Um, the second was abuse of power for threatening to withhold military aid from Ukraine in exchange for damaging information on Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden. From the onset of the trial, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said that they would not convict Donald Trump, that they would acquit him. And true to form, they acquitted him. Because again, it's if the Senate and the president are of the same party, it's very unlikely that they would convict him. In the case of Richard Nixon, though, I do believe, and I'm not sure what party the Senate was, but I do believe that they would have convicted him because it was clear that he broke a major law. It wasn't just a breach of ethics, it was a major law, and there's no getting around it. Okay. So this is the impeachment process. This is how somebody gets impeached, whether it's a president, a Supreme Court justice, a federal judge, a member of the president's cabinet. This is the impeachment process. So the first is the House of Representatives forms a committee to investigate allegations. That committee can be investigating for years, as was the case of Donald Trump. That committee was started, I want to say, at least a year before the articles of impeachment were delivered. So when they find something and they think that they can go to trial with it, the House charges the president by initiating articles of impeachment. So first the House of Representatives, has to agree to the impeachment, and then they have to physically deliver the articles of impeachment. Once they do that, the House of Representatives passes responsibility off to the Senate. All right. In the trial, the Supreme Court Chief Justice is the judge presiding over it, and the Senate is the jury. Jeez. Then, at the conclusion of the trial, they hand down a verdict. In all cases of a presidential impeachment, they've all been acquitted. Here you see Trump and Clinton acquitted. But even though no president has been removed, there is still recourse because the Senate can censure the president, which doesn't mean much really, but it's just a statement that they can make. It's like having a letter written in your file saying that you've been a bad boy, you've done this, that, and the other thing. And that was the case in Bill Clinton. I know that the Senate censured Bill Clinton. All right. And even though no president has ever been removed from office, sometimes the House will bring articles of impeachment to embarrass or hurt the president and his political party. So impeachments, presidential impeachments, for the most part, are political hit jobs. The chances of actually removing a president are slim to none. In the case of Donald Trump, the House of Representatives knew that the Republican-dominated Senate would not find Trump guilty and would not remove Trump, but they went ahead with the impeachment anyway. Take from that what you will, but at the end of the day, it's extremely embarrassing for the president. It's extremely embarrassing for the party, and the other 3 times, we don't know what the outcome of the 2020 election is, but every other election, the opposite party has won the presidency. In the case of Andrew Johnson, the Republican Ulysses S. Grant won. In the case of Richard Nixon, when he left, Gerald Ford took over, but then Gerald Ford, the Republican, lost to Jimmy Carter, the Democrat. In the case of Bill Clinton, it was in his second term, but his vice president Al Gore ran and then lost in a very close election to George W. Bush. So we'll see if the impeachment of Donald Trump has any effect on the 2020 election. And, I guess, like I said, we'll wait and see. Okay, so if anybody has any questions about this, please feel free to email me. I hope I went over it thoroughly enough for you guys, and have a nice day.